this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Walter Dial, tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors located here in Bethesda. Our mission here on the Exit Readiness Podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to business building transferable or sellable business value and for planning your eventual and inevitable exit from the business. We want to help you exit successfully and on your own terms and conditions.
Pat, let me ask you a question. So, we work with a fairly wide variety of businesses, and that, not only in industries, but also in sizes. And, it's been interesting working with some of our smaller clients, but it's also really interesting sometimes to work with some of our larger clients. So in contrasting the two, what would you say are some of the challenges that owners of the smaller businesses, let's say businesses with 20 or less employees, some of the challenges they face in planning their exit that owners of larger businesses might not face?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first off, there's not as many interested buyers, are there? Considering that the smaller businesses are riskier, not as many people want to buy them, and so sale to a third party sometimes is not an option because of that, or if it is, it's not going to be for the money that they want or need net of taxes. Right. It can be tougher to strengthen some of the key value drivers, like, for instance, building a management team, or because they don't have as many people on their team that are really qualified managers, if you will, to take them to the next level. Yep. And it can be tougher to get that in place, and financial performance, of course, profitability and revenue can be tougher. So strengthening some of the key value drivers and not as many buyers, those are a couple of things that come to mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think those are all good points. And today our topic is exactly that, planning steps for owners with 20 or less employees. And we have back with us, by popular demand, John Dini. He was a guest with us about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And John is the president of MPN Incorporated. So John is an exit planner. He's an author. He's a speaker. We've heard him speak at a few conferences, I know. He's worked with over 500 business owners throughout his career. Helping business owners is certainly his passion. Some people might say he's a little obsessed, but that's perfect for us. And in addition to being a certified exit planner, John has a BS in accounting from Rutgers, is an MBA from Pepperdine University, along with various other professional certifications. John lives in San Antonio with his wife of 40 years. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you, Pat. It's good to be back. I always enjoy talking to you guys.
Yeah, well, thanks, John. Yeah, is your wife of 40 years one of those people that say that you're a little bit obsessed with business owners?
Just a little bit. I think sometimes she wishes I would take up golf, but I haven't gotten around to that yet.
Well, God bless her. So John, as you know, Walter and I, we have served business owners with, $500,000 in revenue to $35 million in revenue and everything in between. And as you would also know, no matter what size the business, owners share many of the same planning issues, such as personal, financial, tax, estate planning issues, personal and business insurance planning for life after the business. That's a big one. Business continuity or planning for the unexpected events of death, disability. That's just to name a few, but there are challenges faced by the owner of a smaller business not faced by the owner of a larger business. And so that's what we wanted to have you back on to discuss today, because I know you've been working on this very intently, thinking about it a lot. You've even developed a new process for the smaller business owner. And so that's what we want to focus on today in this conversation, is just the specific challenges faced by the owner of a business with 20 or less employees. So we just want to get you started here and start talking, and then we'll interrupt you along the way with some questions. How about that?
That sounds great. Not to contradict you, Pat, but there's one other thing they share before we start getting into the differences. No matter what the size of the company is, it's still likely the most important financial event of their lifetimes.
Yeah, no, that doesn't. How does that contradict me? I completely agree with that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, or I wasn't saying if it wasn't recorded, the leaving of a business and the transfer of a business is still the most important event of a small business owner's life. The dollars may not be as big, but they still need to do some planning. The issue they face is a lack of options, if we can say that. And it's not picking on smaller companies at all. It's just the truth. We all know, and Pat and Walter, you guys know, because, we all work in the mid-market, in the $5 to $50 million sale price range. And, when we're in that range and we're talking about companies with cash flows of better than $1 million and with a management team, when we're planning for those, comprehensive planning has to include the possibility of a private equity buyout, of a strategic merger, up to and including a publicly traded company making an acquisition. IPO is on the table. ESOP is a possibility if they have the cash flow and say 100 employees or more. All those options come off the table for a small business. In a business with less than 20 employees, you're reduced to three choices. You're either going to sell it to your employees, maintain ownership in the family, and that's a whole different transfer issue because it's a lot more tax and estate oriented, or you're going to put it up for sale to a third party. And as you said, Pat, there aren't as many buyers in the Main Street world. As we all know, IBBA, the International Business Brokers Association, puts out their numbers every year and their success rates. And they sell about 8,000 businesses a year. And their success rate is about 1 in 5. Brokers who respond to their national surveys say for every 5 small businesses they list, they successfully sell one of them. So, with approximately 150,000 baby boomers who are business owners hitting 65 every year, and 8,000 retiring owners selling through an intermediary, your odds are not terrific unless you have a company that can be competitive with the other small businesses on the market. When I work together with brokers, when one of my clients wants to sell to a third party, and I've got one now that is a software-based company. I had one in the fourth quarter of last year, which was an IT break, fix, and managed services company. The owners looking at those businesses, the buyers looking at those businesses are looking at all kinds of businesses. They're looking at a small manufacturing company. They're looking at a franchise. They're looking at a mall-based retailer. They're looking at restaurants. They're looking at service companies. So, it's a crowded market, and the buyers in it are not particularly enamored of your business. In the mid-market, if I provide B2B services, or if I'm a manufacturer and I'm over $10 million in revenue, the people who are looking to buy a company are looking to buy a company in that industry, in that space. It's a private equity group that specializes in a particular kind of manufacturing or specializes in healthcare services. In the small business market, you just have entrepreneurs looking to buy something. And all they're looking at is your cash flow, your bottom line, and how easy it's going to be to run your business. And those are the things that you focus on when you're planning for a smaller business transfer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hey, John, let me just jump in here for a second. Define for the listeners what you would consider to be a Main Street business in regard to the size, revenue.
Selling price evaluation of under $3 million, Revenue can be anything. I certainly have sold Main Street businesses for $2.5 million that were distributors doing $12 or $15 million in revenue a year. But they're, in distribution, frequently your margins are not close to what they would be in manufacturing or services. So, they're doing $12 to $15 million in revenue, but their cash flow is more around $500,000. And you don't need distribution. Usually doesn't have the employee headcount either. We sold one. I sold one in 17, and I sold one in 18. That were very similar. They were both over $10 million in revenue, but only had 13 or 14 employees.
Hey, John, do you think there's, in that size of business, do you think there's a bigger disconnect in the owner's mind between the value of the company and what we would call transferable value? Because, I've had situations where an owner would, we tell him what his business is worth, and he's like, it can't be worth that much. I make X. And it's like, yeah, you make X, and you also fill every role in the business.
Right. Doug Tatum, who is now at the Newport Group and runs statistics on a lot of these, but he used to have Tatum CFO, and Doug wrote an excellent book called No Man's Land. And he said, no man's land is after you start up a company and you work your tail off building it, and you finally get up to a dozen or so employees, and you're taking home 3 times what you could make working for somebody else. Unfortunately, you're doing 3 full-time jobs to make that happen. And that owner centricity is an issue over and over again. And so people get these misconceptions, as you said, Walter, and I know you're a CPA, but I can't tell you how many CPAs I've heard offhandedly say to their clients, oh, all small businesses sell for 5 times earnings. Well, what are earnings? What is cash flow in a small business? What is the owner centricity? If you've got a business that's doing $1 million a year and you're making $250,000, that's great. But if you're doing it by working 70 hours a week, it's not a saleable business because nobody else can match that kind of effort. We count things differently in small business as well. This is one of the things that, we're constantly dealing with when we go back and forth between the mid-market and Main Street. In the mid-market, we're looking at EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And whatever the owner takes out is whatever the owner takes out. Professional buyers like private equity or strategic acquirers consider whatever the owner's compensation is to be what they would have to pay for a new manager, a new CEO, a new COO to operate that company. In small business, we have far greater commingling of business and personal expenses. You take a business trip and you take along the wife and you tack on a few extra nights in the hotel and you chuckle as you sit over dinner in a nice restaurant and say, I guess this is our board meeting. And when you commingle these things, that is part of the value of a Main Street business. So in Main Street, we're looking at seller's discretionary earnings. The amount of money, you have a car. The company pays for you to have an automobile. And it pays the gas and it pays the repairs. Well, if the automobile is not actually a delivery truck that you're taking home and putting in the driveway because you live in a nice neighborhood that doesn't allow commercial vehicles in the driveways, if it's just your personal vehicle, that's part of your compensation. That's part of the cash flow you calculate when you're calculating a Main Street business. So people mix these back and forth. They read that their industry organization says in your industry, all these mid-market companies are selling for 5.5 times cash flow. Well, that's EBITDA cash flow. That's not seller's discretionary earnings. And when you change the cash flow calculation, you change the multiple. And that's where we get into the thing that you said, Walter, about, well, hell, look how much I'm making. So you're working 70 hours a week. You're taking $200,000 home. Somebody looks at your company and says, I'll pay you $600,000 for this company. And you say, I can make that in 3 years. Have you ever heard that? All I have to do is run this business 3 more years and I can make that. Well, guess what? In 3 more years, you're still going to get offered 2.5 to 3 times what your discretionary earnings are. And in 5 years, you'll get offered 2.5 to 3 times. And if you're sitting around waiting for somebody to come by and offer you 5.5 or 6 times discretionary earnings, it isn't going to happen because that's not how companies are valued on Main Street.
Yeah, and hey, John, let me jump in here real quick. In regard to seller discretionary earnings, if I'm buying your company and you are a Main Street biz and we're going to be valuing it based on SDE, then I need to have confidence in that SDE number, right? And how you're calculating that those seller discretionary earnings. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just the confidence level of the buyer in regard to what the seller is putting forward as the seller discretionary earnings?
Sure. Because you're right, Pat. That is a tough area because the SDE is frequently, when we talk about commingled expenses, the owner has sometimes taken great pain to not make them trackable, and they have to be trackable if you're going to show them to a buyer. So let's start with cash, number one. No reputable broker will include cash in SDE calculations. Cash is cheating the government and taking money out of the till that's not hitting the company's books. And under no circumstances is a broker going to put his name on recast statements that show under the table cash. And there's no way you can take that to a bank and say these earnings are, including cash that we're not telling anybody about. On the other hand, if it's documentable, you can explain it, and a lot of times you can explain it to a bank. I once had a client, and the buyer we were doing the recasting for the buyer's financing, and I was sitting with the banker, and the banker says, "I don't understand where all this cash flow is going to come from after he takes over this business. I don't see it in the business now." And he said, this guy is saying that he can have like another $100,000 a year in cash flow over the way they're operating now. And I said, okay. I said, you see these 3 employees? And he said, yes. And I said, you see that they all work in the College Station sales office. For those of you not from Texas, College Station is the home of Texas A&M and almost nothing else. And he said, yes. I said, you see all 3 have company cars? Yes. And salaries? Yes. And credit cards? Yes. The new owner thinks, oh, by the way, did you notice that all 3 of the employees have the same last name as the current owner? Yes. The new owner thinks that he can get by without that sales office and it won't cause any problems for the company. And the banker said, I understand. So there are things that you can recast and even show to a bank that they will get, but it has to be solid and documentable.
Yeah, so solid and documentable, 2 key words there.
John, let me ask you a question. So are deals for these smaller companies, are they structured differently? Are you seeing, do they not have, is it more cash up front? Is it less earn-out provisions? Or is the structure kind of similar to bigger deals?
Well, it used to be different. Certainly you see a lot more seller financing. That is without question. And a lot of times when a buyer is unable to put down the kind of down payment, the kind of downstroke that a bank wants to see in order to come in there with financing, the seller has to make it up with a subordinated note. The SBA almost always demands a subordinated note in small business transactions. Even if the seller has 20 or 25% to put down, it is not at all unusual for a small business administration loan to come with another 10 or 15% that the seller has to take back. They want to make sure he's not running for the hills. They certainly got stung badly in the 90s and the 2000s with transfer of companies between family members among new Americans, where they weren't demanding any holdback or subordinated note, and the valuations were just fluff. So they're very, very sticky about that now. So seller's notes are part of it. Earnouts we're seeing more frequently. And what we're seeing in what I call the neutral zone, they're big Main Street companies. So they have over $500,000 in cash flow annually after the owner's basic compensation, but they don't hit that magic $1 million, $1.1 million, $1.2 million that would attract outside professional buyers. So we're talking about $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000 in cash flow. These companies are attracting a lot of search funds, and search funds are a relatively new animal in the small business market. I first started running into them 3 years ago. They are a single buyer who came out of a program in a business school that showed him how to put together a private offering for private investors to get down payment and then go buy a single company and run it, and presumably run it a lot better than the small business owner before him was running it. 3 years ago, they were coming out of Stanford, Northwestern, and Wharton. Today, if you go to searchfunder.com, you'll see that there's 17 or 18 business schools offering this program. And they come to a small business transaction with a playbook. They're all using the exact same 77-item due diligence list, and they're all demanding earnouts. They're all demanding longer-term consulting contracts and subordinated notes. They're trying to structure these things like a mid-market deal, and it's very, very difficult for a lot of small business owners to live up to this, to comply with all this stuff. I've just seen 2 transactions in the last 6 months where a search fund buyer said that he wanted to see 5 years of monthly bank reconciliations along with 5 years of line item specific general ledgers to match up to make sure that there wasn't any fooling around going with the books. I know very, very few Main Street business owners that maintain 5 years of bank recs and line item general ledgers for cross comparison. And this is typical of the kind of things they're asking. And the structure is much more back end heavy, a lot more representations and warranties in the contract, and a lot more clawback provisions if they don't find everything to be the way they were told once they get into the business.
Yeah, and hey, John, just, search funds, just within the last couple of weeks, I was contacted by a couple guys, young guys, and they're all looking, it looks, at least these 2 guys, and I've heard of others here recently, they're looking for at least $1 million in EBITDA. Yeah,
a lot are saying that, but I'm getting... they say that, but the IT company I talked about was about 800 in EBITDA. There was another one I sold last year that was about the same, about 650, 700. And there's another one we have up right now. That software company is about 650 in average SDE. I'm sorry, all 3 of these were SDE. I'm saying EBITDA. And I can tell you the search funds we had. On the IT company, we had at least a dozen search funds sign NDAs, and a couple went to LOI level, and then once we got into it, it was just the due diligence was murder. And the same thing we've had on this software company. We've had at least 4 search funds sign NDAs and look at it, and then they start telling us that the cycle isn't right. That they don't think that the economic cycle is favorable over the next 2 years from their analysis. I always love this, like they're Goldman Sachs. From our analysis, we don't think the economic cycle will be favorable for this type of acquisition in the next 2 years. Well, what are you out shopping for then? Yeah.
Yeah. So, hey, based on your experience just over the last few years in this current environment, and we're talking about the Main Street businesses, 20 and less employees, and back to the question, or to continue with the question about structure that Walter asked. What can a Main Street, $3 million and under valued company, a business owner, expect a bank to ante up in structuring the deal on average? I mean, would you risk saying, yeah, there's an average of they're going to finance 50%, they're going to finance 40%, 60%?
I think 60% is the comfortable number for most. 20% cash from the buyer and 20% subordinated from the seller. If the cash flow to debt service has to be at least 1.25. It has to be 5 to 4, or they won't cover it. But if you've got comfortable debt service coverage and they're not putting up more than 60%, and half of that is guaranteed by the SBA, which means their real risk is 30% of the purchase price, that's about where a lot of deals are getting done.
Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned at the outset, you've been doing even more thinking, concentrated thinking, planning, and thought around serving these Main Street buyers, because like us, they're just folks. They've made a great impact on a lot of different people, their families, of course, and then their communities, their employees, their customers, on and on. It's a long list. And you want to help them be successful in transitioning, if at all possible, even with their limited lack of options. And so that's what we're all about. And one of the part of the mission of this podcast, as you've given more thought to it, and you've actually put together this process that we're adopting for one of our products. Just highlight for the listeners what you consider to be the key planning areas for a business owner who has 20 or less employees.
There's a couple of things, and we've touched on them all as we've gone through, but and certainly it changes dramatically between an internal sale and an external sale, as you know, Pat. If you're selling to employees or family, the pricing is going to be based more on what you need for retirement. And the first thing I ask in my opening interviews with small business owners is, have you had anybody look at that? Do you have any idea what it's going to cost you to retire? And they're like, well, if I have $1 million in the bank, I'll be fine. Not really. You'd be surprised that, when somebody like you, Pat, that's a planner and has the software, does the inflation and longevity assumptions, $1 million may not last you that long if you aren't planning on a pretty modest lifestyle. So, taking a look at that, at the comparison, we call that distance to goal. What do you have now? How much can you put away between now and retirement? And how much is your company going to realize for you? If you're dealing with employees or family, you take that number and say, okay, can the company produce this? Can they pay me either an income or a lump sum if they finance it to get me to this number? If you're going to the outside market, you have to have a realistic viewpoint that the number you need to retire may not be the number that the market's going to value your business.
Yeah, you just mentioned a couple of common misconceptions that we run into, and that is, well, you've mentioned a few. The real value of their business, which is often their largest asset, how much they're actually going to need to do whatever they want to do. And more, it's not so much retirement, it's doing something else after the business. But okay, let's say retirement, whatever they want to do afterwards, how much it's going to cost. And then another common misperception that you just mentioned, John, is how much income that $1 million in the bank can actually generate. Even if they're at a moderate risk level. it's not going to generate the 3, 4, 500,000 or 2, 3, 4, 500,000 they're used to getting out of the company. And so what we advise, and I think that's what you're talking about here, is one of the first things you need to do is make sure you have an accurate financial gap analysis or needs gap analysis, which would include a good number, a good solid objective number for the value of the business, and then a good solid financial planning number that we get the financial planner involved with the whole exit plan and make sure that that's done so that the owner really knows what the actual gap is, if there is indeed one, and there almost always is with these Main Street businesses. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And they have to get their hands or their head around that number and understand how practical it is. And then, the next thing is they have to look at the company. It's not just a financial transaction. Who could run your business? And, we go back to my, 60-hour-a-week, 70-hour-a-week examples, although 60 seems to be at the top end for guys in their 60s, but I still see an awful lot of them. And Pat, we have another tool called the Owner Centricity Quiz at ownercentricity.com, where people are welcome to go in. And that site doesn't sell any products. It's just up for the good of the small business world, so they can take a look at how much their company is dependent upon them to run on a day-to-day basis. And they need, it's two parallel things. The financial planning is one track, but it has to be parallel with management skills transfer planning, whether it's to people you know already or to an outsider. You have to have a company that somebody else can run. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a company that's flat or declining in sales, and a small business owner has said, yeah, well, when I worked 60 hours a week, it was doing fine. But when I decided to cut back to 40, it started to drop off. But, as soon as a young guy gets back in here and he's willing to work 60 or 65 hours a week, he can bring it right back. It's not going to happen. That those buyers aren't out there, especially in Gen X and the millennials. They're not interested in being the first one in the morning, the last one to go home at night, and the guy that, sells all the big deals and cleans the toilets. That's not what they're looking for. Any
other key aspects? And I'm really thinking about, the Exit Express that you've put together. Any other key planning areas there that you want to mention?
Well, it's Exit Map Express, and it has nine modules, and that's at exitmapexpress.com if you just want to look at the modules you go through. And it's the stuff we've been talking about. It's understanding what you want in life after the business. It's understanding how much that's going to cost. It's understanding what your distance to goal is, or what your gap analysis is, as you put it, Pat. And then understanding what your company looks like to an outsider and what you need to do to shape it up to make either an outsider or an insider capable of running it in a reasonable way, and what it looks like to a bank. Those are all tools that we contain in Express, and it's designed, as you know, Pat, for an advisor to take the client through in 90 days and give them the answers to all these key basic questions. Now, it's not going to fix everything. In 90 days, you're not going to start on management transfer. You're not going to start on new skills development. You're not going to start on restructuring the finances of the company. But in 90 days, we can give a small business owner a clear picture of the things he has to be concentrating on if he or she wants to get out in the time frame they choose.
Yeah, John, I really appreciate your commitment to continuing to develop tools for advisors like us and our firm and Walter's firm here. As you know, we've adopted the Exit Express process and really appreciate those tools that you've developed that we've been able to incorporate into our product line. And that's a phenomenal summary, I think, that you just gave a few minutes ago of this call. Some great advice there. But as we wrap up, is there any last parting words of wisdom that you would pass on to the Main Street business owner?
It's never too soon. once you've gone through the exercise of figuring out what your end game looks like, what your objective is, both financially and for the business, because small business owners are close to their employees. They don't want to walk away on their employees. They feel responsible for employees and their family and their customers. So once you have that picture in mind, it will change the way you run your company from now on. Whether you're 5 years out or 10 years out, just going through the exit process, the exit planning process, is going to tell you who you should be hiring, how you should be training them. And I always use the immortal words of that great New York Yankee philosopher, Yogi Berra, who said, if you don't know where you're going, you could wind up somewhere else.
Yeah, I love Yogi. Absolutely. Miss him. So, John, one other question. You had spent many years as a business broker. You still are. But I don't know how many transactions you're doing. Are you still, if someone is listening and they're interested in having talked to you about doing an actual transaction for them, which we don't do, as you know, what we do is help owners. We're agnostic. We're agnostic about how an owner exits. We want to help them figure out what the best route is and put a plan together for them to do that. And then, when it comes to the actual transaction, hopefully we've helped them to get their business to a point where it's sellable. Then there needs to be a transaction specialist. Are you still doing transactions?
No, not really, Pat. Thanks for the thought. But I bring it to a broker because I don't maintain. Nowadays, 90% plus of all inquiries on any company come in off the internet, and a good brokerage shop should be maintaining 16 or 17 websites. And I don't maintain that infrastructure anymore to be handling the transaction. The ones I've referred to, the one I did two, the one I'm doing right now, I did in cooperation with a broker, and we're sharing the commission on the success fee. The other one or two two I've done in the last 2 years came to me with an LOI and with a letter of intent, an LOI in hand, and said, we've been talking to somebody, they've made us an offer, we have no idea where to go from here. Can you please consult with us through the transaction? And that's more what I was doing from a business coaching and consulting side rather than actually brokering them to third parties. I don't maintain a stable of buyers anymore. The list that is stock and trade for most brokers, and I don't maintain the websites. I still have a license, but don't come to me to broker your business because I really wouldn't do a good job.
Okay. Appreciate that transparency. Okay. So is there anything that you do want to promote today, John?
No. Exit Map Express is, as you know, what we're selling to advisors like yourself, Pat. And, if you go to that site and you say, gee, I'd like to talk to somebody, if they're in your area, I'm going to send them to you. That's really my focus is on, I walked in this morning. It's one of my rare days in the office when I'm not out coaching business owners. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Exit Map Express tasks on my list for cleaning up a new tool, fixing a website issue, stuff like that. So that's really become my focus.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're doing that, so I'm not going to keep you much longer. If anyone wants to contact you, though, how can they do that? Or do you even want people to contact you?
No, that's fine. Actually, if they want to follow, Awake at 2 o'clock is my blog site where I write about exit planning, especially from a small company owner point of view. So the numeral 2, awakeat2o'clock.com, is where they can read my stuff, and they're welcome to subscribe. And Pat, you've contributed to that site as well. So we get a lot of experts coming in and putting stuff up on that site. And again, that's just intended for business owners who are thinking about it to help them understand the factors that go into it.
Well, that's fantastic. John, you're always a great guest. Thank you. Annual guest at least. You're in the rotation, and we appreciate you coming on. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, John.
I appreciate it. Walter, thank you for your time. Pat, thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. And if you'd like to reach out to either Walter or myself regarding building the value of your business or planning your exit, you can reach Walter at 301-951-9090. You can reach me at 301-859-0860. You can also access a free exit readiness assessment at nslp.com and other resources as well at exitreadiness.com and grfcpas.com. Until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dials signing off.